And then let's get us live on the thing. Dealing with mental noise is what we're talking about today. And we're going to share it in the group. Here we go. Got it. Oh, it's so good to have you back, guys. Thank you very much for being here. We're talking about dealing with mental noise. It has come up so much recently. There's a lot of static in the collective mental field, and we're all dealing with it in one way or another. Oh, there's two of me. Look, there I am, and there I am again. Guys, listen, if you are dealing with mental noise of all sorts, whether it's overthinking or ruminating or worrying, constantly churning about things you know you can't resolve, perhaps you're second guessing your every move, perhaps you're torn in two with guilt, regardless of what choice you make, whether you go route A or route B, you're constantly second guessing your decisions, or perhaps you go through guilt analysis where you're questioning over and over again, did I make the right decision or am I doing the right thing? If you're living in the mental world, then what you're doing is you're spending a vast amount of creative energy that could be liberated, for beautiful, noble, and life-affirming uses. Take it from me, guys. I am a chronic overanalyzer, a chronic overthinker, and I know what that agony is like. I also know what it feels like to be hoisted up and out of the mechanics of the clinging and clanging and thinking and thonking, to be lifted up and out of that and delivered into mental clarity and peace. So what I've got today for you is a real treat. I've got 3 client stories that will help you. Now, the clients that we serve, let me tell you a little bit about them. The clients that we serve at Sovereign Masters are brilliant. They are brilliant. They are highly intelligent, creative, spiritually strong people who are grounded in integrity and who are really beginning to build a life of purpose. We serve doctors, we serve lawyers, we serve engineers, we serve political influencers, we serve life coaches, entrepreneurs, authors, executive directors in higher education. And this means that the type of client that we serve spends a lot of time in the cerebral world. They spend a lot of time figuring things out, thinking and thinking and thinking. They may be intuitive thinkers or they may be sensory thinkers. It doesn't matter. What matters is that they spend their awareness, they live their life designed to comprehend things. So they need things to make sense before they can really accept them and embody them. They put stuff together. They are truth seekers, in other words. So that means that that's often where their brilliance comes from. It's when they're in their superpower, is when they're in their cerebral world. But it also means that that's where the agony manifests. So whenever they're in dissonance, whenever you're in dissonance, whenever I'm in dissonance, if you're a cerebral person, that's where the agony manifests. For example, I have a wonderful, wonderful client of mine who is experiencing certain symptoms in the mind, in the brain organ. But it isn't really a headache that's bothering her. It isn't really the function of, or her cognitive function that's bothering her. What's bothering her is the worry about it. That's what's bothering her. So in other words, where our brilliance comes from is also where our agony sits, if we're that sort of a person, right? Do you understand this? Is it COVID that's bothering you, or is it the anxiety about the COVID that's bothering you, right? All that anxiety, all that mental noise, it becomes narrative. It becomes linear words that are spoken. And that persuades our attention off of the true miraculous goodness that is also there, yearning for you to harvest it. You can't see it because you're locked in a mental discourse about matters that don't matter. So I'm going to share 3 client stories from high-level thinkers who overcame that constant mental static. And I'm going to share with you what we did and what happened next for them. And I know that you're going to resonate with them and what they've been through. All right, so have you got your paper and you've got your pen? Because I've got 3 takeaways that I want you to capture. All right, ready? Yes, the people are ready. All right, first up is Kenneth. He came to me earlier this year. He's a boat captain running a successful business, and he was referred to me because he was intellectually unfulfilled in his vocation. Do you understand that? So he was hungry. He was intellectually hungry, which meant that for him practically, even though he liked his job and he was good at his job and he was doing great at his job, his mind was preoccupied elsewhere, longing to be used. In other words, his genius was not present with his service. In other words, he wasn't allowing the flow of miraculous abundance that comes with appropriate integration. So using the sovereign way, what we did was to quickly discover how and why he had compartmentalized 5 very specific aspects of his knowing of himself. And these 5 parts of the way that he saw himself, or the 5 aspects of his being, you could say, were compartmentalized. They need to come together as a superpower to be in cohesion for true fulfillment. Because otherwise, you're looking at the world like a cracked mirror, is the way that you're looking at the world. And you will not see a cohesive, powerful reflection of truth. So what we did was we brought those aspects of himself into cohesion for true fulfillment. And it revealed an entirely new picture of how he could serve. He had been thinking about too many different fragments instead of bringing it into one meta view that showed him a completely new picture of how he could serve. Less than a month later, he sold his business for a really nice sum and landed the perfect job in employment, paying almost twice as much as he had been making in his business. Right? So the takeaway from that is that you cannot allow big results to manifest in your expanding need for fulfillment if your perspective is fragmented and compartmentalized. Do you understand that? So you must integrate your consciousness. You must integrate your knowing of who you are. That's how you're going to allow much bigger miracles to come through, and it's going to bring you much closer to Christ. Here's my second client. Her name was Andy, and she was a physical trainer in Baltimore. She was a wonderful, wonderful person who I fell head over heels in love with really quickly. Her mission was to help people become really embodied in their body, to be really present and strong and fit and confident in who they were. That was her mission. So she's a heart of gold, a soul of gold, and she knows who she is on this path. She wants to be here for the world, and she wants to make the world a better place. But she just could not take her business to the next level. She could not take it to the next level, and she suspected it had something to do with a mother trauma, but she couldn't quite figure it out. And she laid up all night, churning this thing over and over and over, repeating old conversations, making up new conversations, imagining and analyzing potential scenarios, and chatting back and forth with all the different characters that might eventually come to play at some point in these different scenarios, trying to make sense of it all. Just trying to figure it all out, trying to think her way through the problem. I asked her, this is in our first session, I asked her what her one main complaint was. What is the one main complaint? And she listed 50 things, 50 symptoms in the business, in the relationship, in her body, in her energy field, and in her headspace. She went on and on and on with all of the different things, all of the different pieces of the puzzle, all of the different aggravations and annoyances that were manifesting. And it was obvious that she was never going to be able to sort all of this out, thinking about them one by one, turning them over in her mind. But using the sovereign way, we quickly discovered the meta view. A meta view is when you can look from the top down and you can see, you can make sense of all of these millions of dots. Suddenly you can draw a line between them and you can reveal what the picture is. And what we saw was that all of those things was in fact one thing. Like that. 1 billion trillion little data points suddenly collapsed and became one identifiable and easily digestible issue. And then I showed her how to release it. Boom. She wrote back 3 weeks after she left, and she shared that she'd experienced a forgiveness and freedom unlike anything she'd ever known. She'd forgiven her mother. She'd forgiven herself. She felt aloft and she felt in love with her business. And then half a year later, we connected again. 6 months later, I did another check-in with her to see how things were going. And her business had taken off. It had just launched itself. And the really funny thing was, she hadn't been doing anything differently. She hadn't changed anything. It's just that she was in the right energy. She was in the right mind. All of that mental noise, all of that mental energy that she was spending trying to bring herself into balance, trying to maintain a positive outlook and do things right, all of that energy had been liberated and was now being channeled in creative and loving and uplifting ways. So the right clients were walking in. The results that they were having, the results that her clients were having were way enhanced. Suddenly she's producing these like super fit people because her magnetism has increased, because her energy is focused and cohesive. All of that mental energy was released to become expansive. So here's the second takeaway. Pen's poised. The second takeaway is that you aren't going to overcome this by fixing all of the little problems and by solving all the little problems or the little puzzles and by healing every little layer in this never-ending onion. Your thinking isn't linear, you see. Your thinking is quantum. And the thought line that you can access depends entirely on the psychoneurosomatic state that you're in. And if you are incessantly analyzing your problems, you will never be free from them because you're forming your vibrational reality based on that state. You need to discover the core data point and release that one. That's rapid. That's how you topple the first domino in a never-endingly intricate mandala of dominoes. Instead of healing them one by one, heal that one. Understood? Good. Yes? Not quite. We will go back and do that one again. All right. We're going to cover that. We're going to go over that takeaway one more time. So understand this. Follow along now. You will not overcome all the little problems and solve all the little puzzles and heal all the little layers of a never-ending onion. You cannot do that. It's impossible to do that, to think your way through all of the disparate pieces, because your thinking is not linear. That's an old model of thought. The new model of thought is that quantum cognition essentially gives you access to a realm of thinking based on your psychoneurosomatic state. That means your mental state plus your soul energetic state plus your physical state all together creates the container through which your consciousness goes. Which means that at any given time, the total state that you are in will dictate the line of thought that you're able to access. So if you're looking at this problem and 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 this problem, all of the different problems like Andy was, she was looking at 50 different problems. If you're looking at all of them together, then you cannot overcome the vibration that you're in or the state of anxiety that you're in, because each of them collapses the potentiality of where your thoughts can go. And you are then locked in a feedback loop of rumination. So what you instead need is a way, like the sovereign way, to discover what the core issue really is, just like Andy did, to find that all of those 50 little problems are in fact one problem. You need to find that one problem. That's the one that you release, like that. Otherwise, you're remanifesting the same issue in multiple different ways. Does that make sense? So that is a rapid way to overcome that incessant chatter in the mind. Good, thank you. My last client story that I wanted to share with you, his name is David, and he's a business consultant turned coach who used to work for the Fortune 500 companies as an efficiency consultant. So he was trained to analyze, identify, and correct flaws and potential risks, right? So you can see where I'm going with this already. So his consciousness, his mindset was trained that way, to be locked in the 3D fabric and look for the imperfections that could be tweaked or turned or twisted, right? To improvement. That's his job. And he was incredibly good at it. So he hired me because his 7-year relationship seemed to be going nowhere at all. And even though that he and his girlfriend knew that they loved each other, they just couldn't get along. They could not get along. They had been through different therapists before, and always the relationship was condemned. And friends and family said, "What are you doing with each other? You would be much happier without each other." But they couldn't leave because they were so in love. Oh my goodness me. Can you imagine? They did a 6-month couples program together, and we discovered no wonder they didn't get along. They were trying to get along. They were both desperately trying to understand each other through their own unique way of being. You know, sometimes in our conversations, I would just sit back and just marvel that they were saying exactly the same thing, but arguing with each other. Back and forth, they were bickering. And I was like, you don't disagree. You are actually agreeing with each other. But you see, there was constant dissonance and constant conflict in their relationship because they couldn't figure the other one out. They could not understand each other. And they both were so locked in their own way of thinking, in their own way of processing, that they just couldn't meet on a soul level. They couldn't meet in truth. They were constantly trying to untangle all the story. So you see, he was an introverted, sensitive thinker designed to seek out and correct flaws. And she was an extroverted, intuitive feeler designed to express her inner flow. So what do you think that was like for her when he was constantly trying to seek out all the ways that she could be improved? And what do you think it was like for him, trying to wrap his head around this airy-fairy sort of a presence who's just a million miles away from the physicality that he knew? But when you can see this, when you can unwrap this and you can unwrap the dynamics of the relationship between consciousness, energy, and something manifest like a relationship, then it's easy to design a shared space, a shared spiritual space where they could actually meet outside of that wild dynamic of trying to get into each other through all of the mechanisms of personality. You can instead meet in poise and ask, is this truth or is this story? That was mind-blowing and completely world-changing for these beautiful people who loved each other so much that they actually had the authority. They had the authority to be who they are. Neither of them had to change to accommodate the other. And B, to know that they have the authority to ask themselves, am I listening to truth or am I listening to a story that I've made up based on my way of thinking about how he should be thinking? Suddenly they had a language together. Suddenly they had a way to meet in poise and actually get to know the real one who they were in love with. So takeaway number 3, the moral of that story is that you cannot understand how another is thinking. You cannot understand what the other truly is experiencing in the moment that you think you're sharing. So if what is triggering your mental noise, the discomfort in your mind at 3 o'clock in the morning, if it's got anything to do with relationship, then you will find yourself continually slipping into analysis and rumination about that relationship, because there is no conclusion to be found inside your way of figuring things out. Instead, what you can do is learn different frameworks for thinking so that you can put the narrative in your head through various simple treatments to see beyond your blind spots and break out of rumination. That's what David and his girlfriend did. They learned how to put the narrative in their mind through simple treatments so they could really begin to see who the other was. Dissolving rumination like that. So here are the 3 big takeaways again. I'm going to wrap this up now, but I'm just going to summarize here. Number 1, this is what we learned from Kenneth. You cannot allow really big results in your expanding fulfillment if your perspective of yourself is fragmented and compartmentalized. So if this is something that is causing you constant overanalysis and constant thinking, like Kenneth was simply not fulfilled, intellectually fulfilled in his work, in his vocation, because he was fragmented. His understanding of himself was fragmented. And integrate your consciousness, bring together the different aspects of yourself to allow much bigger miracles to flow. Number 2, this is what we learned from Andy. You cannot overcome this by fixing all of the little problems and solving all the little puzzles, because your thinking isn't linear, it's quantum. So the thought line that you can access depends entirely on your state of being. And if you're incessantly analyzing your problems, you won't be free of them. So the simple solution is to discover the core data point, the core trauma, the core error that's causing this overthinking, and then release that one. Takeaway number 3, learn different frameworks for thinking. Learn simple ways of thinking differently so that you can put that incessant narrative in your head through various simple treatments to see beyond your blind spots and break out of rumination. Here's a last tip. This is my favorite. It's the easiest one. Get a high quality peppermint essential oil. It is chock full of a highly volatile compound called the phenylpropanoid. And it snaps you out of pattern thinking, and it brings all of the electricity to the prefrontal cortex, which is the part of the brain that you use when you're present and wise. And that's going to get you some peace, and it's going to get you some calm when you're in that acute need, acute anxiety. And of course, we're here to help you develop your mental and vibrational mastery as you walk along your path of expanding consciousness. And we've got an absolutely magical 3-month coaching opportunity coming up. And if that's for you, reach out and let us know. So I'm going to end with my favorite quote from As a Man Thinketh. This is by James Allen. Let men and women discover the truth that they are the makers of themselves by the virtue of the thoughts they choose and encourage. That mind is the master weaver, both of the inner garment of character and the outer garment of circumstance. And that as they may have hitherto woven in ignorance and pain, they may now weave in enlightenment and happiness. Thank you for joining, everybody. Are there any other questions? In that case, have a wonderful afternoon and evening.